This is the BioCentury Show. Brought to you by the 4th East-West Biopharma Summit in Singapore. This March, explore how to globalize Asia innovation and connect with key players across Asia's innovation arc, from India to China to Japan.
Hello and welcome to the BioCentury Show. I am Simone Fishburn, Editor-in-Chief at BioCentury, and I'm joined today by returning guest Simeon George, CEO and Managing Partner of the venture firm SR1. Simeon co-founded SR1 Capital Management following its spinout from GSK in 2020. He'd previously worked in management consulting at Bain and investment banking at Goldman Sachs. Simeon has led SR1's investments in several marquee deals, including CRISPR Therapeutics, Principia Biopharma, Turning Point Therapeutics, Progeny, and he co-founded both Nkarta Therapeutics and Arcellx. So you got some really interesting companies there. But before we dig into your company interests and your portfolio companies and your strategy, I want to talk a little bit about some sort of high-level biotech things that are on everybody's mind, right? So there is a lot facing biotech right now. Capital markets still offering very little up, unforgiving, should we say, uncertainty regarding the Trump administration's policy effects on biotech, both from a capital point of view and from a regulation point of view. But I want to point out that at the same time as that, this should be a golden age of biotech, right? Given the amount of innovation and talent. So with all that mixture, maybe tell us, Simeon, what are you hearing? What is top of mind for you and your partners? And, you know, add on to that your portfolio companies and their exec teams. What is the word on the street right now?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, Simone, for hosting me again. It's a pleasure to speak with you. And
it's such a success last time. We had to have you back.
Okay, good. Hopefully not disappoint. I mean, listen, I think it is a good time to be chatting. I mean, we're trying to be as thoughtful, introspective as we can. And I would say it is like, it's very much an environment where you've got all these different forces that are racing and you're trying to figure out how to make sense of them all. And I would say, first off, I don't pretend that we have figured it out. So we are trying as best we can. You know, you mentioned some of the successes that I've had, that we've had SR1. And, you know, I think you can learn more from success than you can from failure. And in my opinion, what that means is leaning into what made companies like Principia or Arcellx, what has made them successful. How can we do more of those things against this challenging market backdrop, political backdrop, all the different forces that in many ways we can't impact necessarily, but what we can control is sticking to first principles of how you create value in biotech. And so for us, this is an incredible moment in time. As you mentioned, there's no shortage of scientific substrate innovation products that we believe are going to have meaningful clinical impact. So we're trying to keep that in mind. Medium to long term, that's what's going to drive value. And then in the short term, I'd say trying to recalibrate, trying to be as disciplined as we can around capital allocation, around how we can build value in a fundamental manner, de-risking, the way that we think about path to value creation, and doing things, frankly, with this idea of we probably have to be more efficient, do more with less. Those constraints are only going to be there, in my opinion, for the short to medium term. They're not going to go away overnight. So how do we create value, but do it in a manner that is probably now fewer resources around the table to get to those proof points? So there is some level of fundamental business model reorientation that needs to happen, is happening, I believe. And so at SR1, we're leaning into those things. Maybe I'll stop there.
I will come back to, because there's a lot in there. It's a very packed answer. So I want to come back to some of the issues you raised, but let's you've talked about building value. Let's talk a little bit about company valuations. There's still a lot of concern that companies are overvalued, in particular those who raised, for example, during the boom, up to 2021 and 22, and that some of those companies haven't adjusted to this market. What is your take on that? And how do you look at the valuation reset and talk to your portfolio companies about it?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say crudely, like valuation is in the eye of the beholder. So it doesn't, on the private side, it genuinely doesn't matter what you have on your books. It's what is someone going to pay to put more money into your company to get to the next clinical or preclinical proof points. The market is ultimately going to give us that feedback, and we can, as much as we want, cling on to whatever notion of value we think we've captured in the prior round. But I would argue, and what I say to our boards now, to companies, is you've got to be pragmatic. Like if you can go out and raise capital on attractive terms, on more favorable terms, more power to you. Like that's amazing. Of course, we should be doing that. There are going to be instances where you can still create that level of scarcity and have leverage. And those are companies that generally right now have proof points around product concepts in big markets where there's a clear path to development, regulatory, commercial success. So for those companies, like, amen, let's go out and let's raise up rounds, let's do all these creative things, let's generate value. And I wish we could have all of our companies in that bucket, right?
But are you advising down rounds and flat rounds when necessary?
Yeah, and so equally, I think we have to be ready to take our medicine in the situations where we haven't yet hit the proof points. There isn't necessarily a clear path to development or regulatory or commercial value creation. And so there it's, how do you create enough scarcity? And so one of the inputs is going to be, can you make the offering as attractive as it can be for new investors, for existing investors, to get to those hopeful next set of proof points, right? So I believe we have to be pragmatic. And to your point, on the public side, it's clearly happened. There's been a reckoning, valuations are down 30, 50, 70%, whatever it is, right? Depending on stage. On the private side, it's still lumpy. It's still somewhat, I'd say inefficient, but it is happening. Like in real time, companies are faced with these sort of days of reckoning. And certainly our job as stewards of capital for our LPs is to ensure a path for the next amount of capital to generate value. Like we have to think about opportunity cost, and we have to forget about the cost that's gone into this point and sort of hold on to those artificial valuations.
And, I'm sure that those are difficult conversations to have around the boardroom. I think it's easy to, say that recipe. And I think it's hard probably in person for people to accept that sometimes. But when we chatted last week, you used the phrase in this context that we're in a new normal. And I wonder if you could expand on what that means for, companies or for biotech right now.
Yeah, I mean, listen, so first off, again, acknowledging it's very hard to predict the future, but there's been enough time that's been in this reset state where, again, cost of capital is fundamentally higher than it's been, like 5, 7, 10 years ago, right? We have to acknowledge it's more expensive now to do the things that we need to do to get companies to proof points. The public markets have retrenched. Fewer companies have gone public. We can expect this year, next year, it'll likely be, again, a smaller number than went out in like 2020, 2021. And pharma, frankly, is quite discerning. It's not like they're coming in bargain basement sale, buying everything, right? So we have to be constrained in the way that we think about how do we execute on our plans. This is the new normal. I don't know when it's going to change. I hope it changes. I hope things get, easier. But, I think we have to be comfortable doing hard things. We have to be comfortable making hard decisions. We have to be.
That means closing programs down. What does it mean? What are the kind of hard decisions you have to make?
I think everything has to be up for discussions, right? You have a finite amount of capital. You want to get to certain proof points. Can you be more disciplined around how you get to those particular value creation points? Can you do, for example, if you have $100, can you do it with $90? Can you constrain the amount of resources, time required to get to those proof points? Can you be disciplined around how you think about capital allocation so that instead of doing your 4 favorite projects, you're only picking 2, you're deprioritizing one, you're maybe partnering one sooner? Can you really figure out where is ultimately you're going to get the maximum bang for your buck, right? So those are the sorts of discussions we need to be having. And I would argue, Simone, it shouldn't just be for the companies that are most challenged. I would say for the companies that are doing incredibly well, now is the time to reorient yourself around the new business of biotech. Because we know, again, from my perspective, things are going to be in this new normal for an extended period. And ultimately, as stewards of capital for our shareholders, for our LPs, we need to figure out how to try and maximize the efficiency of the capital that are going into these companies to generate the output that hopefully leads to new medicines, leads to return on capital, that keeps this business model successful and going forward.
I want to ask you one more thing before we go to a short break on this front. And I think it's maybe harder for public than private companies, more of an issue, but I think all companies face this. And this is the question of when do you pivot? And it sort of goes back to this idea that, the only sin is to run out of cash, which I don't know that I really agree with. But, Jamie Rubin recently wrote a sort of advice to CEOs in BioCentury. And I think it must be so hard. She says that quite often what she hears is companies say, but we raised money on this premise, and so it's wrong to pivot to another one. How do you know when you talked about reducing programs, but suddenly you maybe get new data, and how do you know when to keep going, when to pivot, when to close down? What are the signs that you look for, and what's your system for making those decisions?
Yeah, I mean, first up, I would say that we look to. And in large part, what we are underwriting is the quality of the management teams and the CEO in particular to be able to be the custodian of how we ultimately create enterprise level value, right? So they are the closest to what's happening within their company. They're living and breathing the products. They hopefully have a sense of competitive landscape, how things are changing. And so we're looking for leadership in these companies to be able to articulate why the strategy going forward is the optimal way to generate outsized returns, right? So it starts with having clarity of that sort of context, belief in the leadership, their ability to articulate those viewpoints. And of course, at the board level, we can pressure test assumptions, we can calibrate, we can, agree, disagree, but ultimately the person running the management team is the ones that, in my opinion, should be driving those decisions. And if they're not driving those decisions, if I'm the one that's telling them their strategy, one of us is in the wrong job, in my opinion. Right? So that fundamentally is the thing that I would say we hone in on. Do we have the right leadership that we believe can make the best decisions for how we're going to allocate capital going forward based on how the playing field is changing, shaping up? And so that's where you get to now the specifics around the product, the data you've generated, what's happening on the competitive side, the regulatory side. And so then it's bespoke for each company, but that's the way at least I go to bed at night sleeping well, is the idea that I've got high quality CEOs, management teams that I believe are able to make those decisions, hold somewhat opposing views, and ultimately make the best decision or the most informed decision at that point in time.
Well, that is a great point. Don't go to sleep though, but a great point to take a short break, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes.
Thank you.
This March, BioCentury Bay Helix and Insights partner McKinsey & Company returned to Singapore for the 4th East-West Biopharma Summit. This year's theme, how to globalize Asia innovation from cross-border deals to the NewCo model. Meet key players from across Asia's emerging arc of innovation, including China, Japan, South Korea, Australia, India, and Southeast Asia. Don't wait, deals are closing every week. Register today at biocenturyeastwest.com.
We are back at the BioCentury Show, and I'm delighted to be here with Simeon George of SR1. So, Simeon, I think that no conversation in biotech today is complete without talking about the innovation coming out of China. Now, you, SR1, have invested in at least 2 companies via the NewCo model, Avenzo and more recently Windward. Talk a little bit about I'm going to ask you some more detailed questions in a minute, but at a high level, talk a little bit about the drivers for this and how much of your consciousness was, oh, here's an asset from Asia versus your other, ways of just generally investing.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think first off, we have to acknowledge the incredible pace and acceleration of expertise in China to develop new products, right? And, I think it is incumbent on us, certainly as venture capitalists that are looking at building value, that we think about the most efficient way to develop products. And there's no doubt right now that what China is doing across the tapestry of small and mid-sized companies is incredible from an efficiency standpoint, from a quality of product standpoint. So we need to be there. We need to be assessing what's happening. Currently, as we speak, two of my colleagues are on the ground in China, meeting with startups, identifying assets potentially to in-license and to create hopefully newcos around. And so again, I'd say we are front and center thinking through path to value creation, starting with the substrate coming out of China. The second point I would make is for us, the thesis, and going back to my last answer on quality of management teams to guide us through difficult decisions, we believe the spike in biotech comes from the quality of drug developers, folks that understand how to take substrate, science, or preclinical or early clinical stage assets, develop them in the right patient populations, the right patient settings, understand how to enroll those patients, understand how to work with regulatory frameworks to get products through clinical and regulatory and then commercial proof points. And so our edge here is identifying those talented individuals, convincing them to work with us and vice versa, to bring substrate from China and then develop them for US, European markets, right? So the two examples you mentioned, Avenzo, that's the Turning Point team, Athena and Mohammed, drug developer extraordinaire combo team, finding assets in China, having the insider on how do you now develop value in the context of Avenzo, as a US-based company. Windward Bio, same story with Luca Santorelli, doing this again post-Vective and other successes he had to develop assets now in his hands. We believe there's value to be captured. So that's how we're thinking about the China strategy, if you will, for SR1 at this point in time.
So you, to some degree, may have answered this implicitly, but I'm sort of interested to what degree at a macro level these deals are coming from outbound interest by China or Asia companies who are looking, and they can't find financing because it's quite hard in China right now. They have their own bear market. How much is it that versus inbound interest with VCs actively shopping over there? Can you talk a little bit about that? It feels like it's shifted from one to the other recently.
Yeah, and I'd say, Simone, this is the MO of SR1. If you were to say, how do we work? Everything that we do is proactive. Like, we're not waiting for a startup to come knocking on our door saying, would you like to give us money? Or, please, can you think about us? We are proactively trying to identify the highest quality startups or substrate in the case of China to be able to capture value around, right? So for us, it's proactive, it's preemptive, it's going out there, it's hustle oriented to identify those great opportunities. We believe it's much more compelling than being reactive and waiting for them to come to us, because if they're coming to us, that means they're probably coming to at least 10 of my peer group. Right. There's nothing that's special about SR1 in that point. And I think about everything now through the lens of what gives SR1 the right to be successful, like to ultimately succeed. And so that proactivity is a critical part of at least the way that we work.
Yeah. And, one of the companies, Windward, was set up in Switzerland. Another, has been done in the UK. And I say that because a lot of this newco model involves creating companies in the US. But out of 13, a couple are in Europe. And I really wanted to dig into that aspect and see, given what's going on in the US, turbulent times everywhere. And I'm wondering whether Europe is going to see more of this in all events, and whether Europe has an opportunity to participate in this wave. And is there any sense in which it has any advantage?
That's a good question. I would say, so certainly for SR1, we are transatlantic, right? So we have a presence in Europe. We have a team that's in the UK that is sourcing and identifying opportunities coming out of that region. So we do think there's an edge to having people on the ground developing connectivity. The second part of that premise, though, is that there are folks like Luca that have experience, that judgment, our belief in their ability to execute, right? And candidly, there's fewer of those sorts of individuals in Europe relative to the US. So that remains one of the challenges. But as and when we can identify folks like that, we believe this is an incredible opportunity for companies in Europe to be built and scaled, whether it's starting with technologies or products that are developed locally, or whether it's, to your point, finding assets that are coming from China or elsewhere, right? So for us, it's, again, really trying to triangulate between quality of science, product orientation, coupled with management team, or at least founder, CEO, that we believe has the ability to execute and to do things that are seemingly impossible. And so in Europe, we are working hard to identify the next crop of talented executives such as Luca.
So, you know, certainly we know that in the US, biotechs are taking note, and some of them are quite concerned, actually, about the competition from China. And John Maraganore, the former longtime CEO of Alnylam, now he is chair of City Therapeutics. I conducted a fireside chat with him last week, and he made this very strong point that people should be embracing rather than fearing the competition from China. And that he sort of sees, actually, I think even on the ground in boardrooms, there's a lot of concern. What do you think about that? And what are you seeing and hearing from other biotech execs and VCs?
Yeah, I would agree with that view. I mean, I would go so far as to say it should embolden us, groups like SR1, the companies that we're working with, to really go after innovative medicines. I think if you're doing something incremental, you're doing something that is like third or fourth in a category right now, I think it's incredibly hard to compete. When you layer on top of this the fact that China is probably going to do things from a capital efficiency standpoint, from a quality standpoint, that is going to run circles for the most part around some of these companies going after the same validated targets, right? So I think the onus is on us now to be bold, to be courageous in terms of how we think about going after differentiated medicines, trying to control our destiny in the context of capitalizing these companies appropriately to get to those proof points. And I think that's going to ultimately, over the medium to long term, I believe that's going to generate value. It's going to make us better at what we do and lead to hopefully clinical impacts-wise more differentiated medicines for patients, right? So I do think we have to up our game now. And this is a rallying cry for myself, for my team, for our ecosystem.
So, that's a really good place for me to be able to circle back to a couple of companies you mentioned at the beginning, Principia and Arcellx. And, you talked about what made those successful. And maybe you can expand on that. To what degree was it that you picked the right biology? What led to picking that right biology, if so? And were the ingredients that went into those companies and the success they had, are they still relevant today in 2025, given the way things are changing around us?
Yeah. So I would start with the last point.
But you can take them one by one, Principia, Arcellx.
Yeah. So
but I think you should probably tell the story. Maybe our audience doesn't necessarily know the story of each of those. So yeah.
Sure. I mean, just to answer the question, I believe certainly the lessons that we learned from those examples are still relevant, are still the path forward for us to create value, to capture value. And again, as I said up front, I think we learn more from success than we do from failure, certainly in biotech. And so, first principles, acknowledging that there's an element of risk, there's an element of luck that goes into everything that we do. And as good as we think we are, we have to acknowledge that there's certain things that have to go your way to be successful, right? And so,
I think we'll all say better lucky than smart. I don't think anybody is going to turn down luck, right?
You need both, but certainly luck is an important thing. Starting with Arcellx, again, I think of this as a project that was born out of prepared mind, care, and thought around how do you imagine the world of cell therapy evolving. You have to think back, we started this company 10 years ago. So there was a lot of excitement around CAR T, CD19, but the field was still evolving in terms of what are the next targets, how to think about differentiated medicines. And so we did a body of work, which I call Prepared Mind, to sort of map out the universe today, where we thought it would get to in terms of novel targets, what were some capabilities around designing these molecules that could lead to a differentiated medicine. And so again, fast forward to today, what we have is a molecule targeting BCMA, which is the next target beyond CD19 that people are excited about, for multiple myeloma, a big market with, again, significant clinical unmet need, with a molecule that is in late stage clinical testing that is showing a best-in-class profile right now. And so it is meeting the medical unmet need in a large commercial opportunity set, with an amazing entrepreneur, Rami Elgandur, who's running this company, executing on on the day-to-day deliverables, has the strategic intent to think about how do you capture value, how do you partner. In this case, we've partnered with Tide Gilead. How do you raise capital, private to public? How do you continue to execute with urgency to get to these next set of regulatory endpoints? So all of these things have come together. Again, multiple inputs, but it started with that drawing board exercise of mapping out what the future might look like and being bold at that time to go after a product concept that we believed could be a differentiating medicine, and then having the right entrepreneur, starting with David Hilbert. I should acknowledge the founder who led the company in the early days, transitioning to Rami to take it to the next level. And so an amazing story, incredibly proud to have been involved in this as a co-founder of the company. And we're so excited to see hopefully this medicine come to market now in the next couple of years.
Go ahead. You're going to maybe talk about.
Yeah, just quickly, Principia, again, not a company that we started, but this concept of, partnering with incredible founders. At the start of the company, there were these two chemists who really were world-class in the way that they thought about covalent chemistry, targets that you could go after that went beyond where the field, at the time was thinking about. In this case, it was taking a BTK inhibitor, moving it outside of oncology into autoimmune diseases, having the chemistry, the edge around how developing molecules where you could have the therapeutic window to do that, and then executing relentlessly, right? Bringing on Martin Babler as CEO, raising capital, doing partnerships, getting to clinical proof points, working through various regulatory challenges, but getting to, again, clarity on that. And again, all these things coming together, it takes time. Like this doesn't happen overnight. And that's why I do believe we need to be medium to long-term focused while solving the short-term challenges that exist, right? So those two examples to me, product orientation, high quality teams, clinical differentiation, and patience, those are the sorts of ingredients that we need in spades at this point in time.
So just in the last few minutes, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and move to sort of some more scientific kind of conversation, but pick up on your idea of the covalent BTK inhibitor. One thing I really want to ask you about is around not specifically covalent chemistry, sorry, small molecule chemistry, and the degree to which, we talk so much about new modalities, new antibody engineering, nucleic acid therapies, but there's still a lot of work and interesting discoveries being made in small molecule chemistries. At the same time, there's this sort of countervailing weight of the Inflation Reduction Act, which has, created what some people think of as a small molecule penalty, a pill penalty. As you look at opportunities, how much are you weighted towards new modalities versus continuing to explore sort of interesting chemistries? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I mean, we're fairly agnostic on this point, Simone. We think about modalities as being tools in the toolbox to allow us to get to, again, product concepts that can generate meaningful clinical data in areas where patients are underserved. And so we don't necessarily focus on advanced technologies. Of course, we've got the history and success from CRISPR, which is really at the forefront of, as we think about novel ways of treating patients. But we're equally comfortable and are still continuing to invest in small molecule chemistry. And I would say, again, the devil is not only in the details, but it's, again, especially in the early stages, it's having confidence that there is a product concept. We think about product market fit, where the solution that you're developing, it's the right way to think about treatment of the patient. And so if that means going through a small molecule, preclinical and development, way of generating value, if that's the right modality for whether it's safety, compliance, competition, or just tractability standpoint, we are happy to look at those sorts of opportunities. And we've just recently invested in an early stage company that is working on traditional small molecule chemistry. If you're going to do that, going back to my earlier point on China, you need to have deep expertise around the chemistry. You need to feel like you're working with world-class chemists on not just incremental approaches to going after targets, but truly innovative approaches that allow us to do things that today cannot be done, right? So there's some risk around that, but that's the way that we would think about doing something like that in a well-known, established area of drug development. And then going back to, again, the idea of advanced technologies, modalities, again, we've had considerable experience now across oligos, gene medicines, gene therapies, ADCs, et cetera, where, again, we are looking for solutions that make sense for patients in the hands of an entrepreneur, a team that knows how to develop those specific products, and we have confidence in their ability to execute. And so we're, if you look at our pipeline or the portfolio that we've invested in, you're going to see it isn't skewed in any way to reflect overexposure to one area or others. I think it has a nice distribution, again, but solving specific bottlenecks that we believe exist today.
Well, that was a great answer. We ourselves are quite focused on bottlenecks at our Grand Rounds conference. You'll be hearing more about that. And I just want to say what a pleasure it was again to have you. And I look forward to continuing conversations with you and watching how the SR1 portfolio develops.
Thank you, Simone. Thanks for your questions. I enjoyed it. And best wishes to you and everyone at BioCentury and your audience.
Thank you, Simeon. Bye.
Thanks.
Brought to you by the 4th East-West Biopharma Summit in Singapore. This March, explore how to globalize Asia innovation and connect with key players across Asia's innovation arc, from India to China to Japan.